value is also 4 points. So what we have again is a case where if the premium is a risk compensation that we pay to the writer for taking a chance, we need to look at what's the relationship between an eventual profit or loss and the premium that you receive, because that is again built into whether there is an overall or eventual loss in that situation. So that risk premium coming into the writer, basically what the writer is saying by accepting this premium is that they're expecting that the eventual put exercise, if it ever occurs, will be less than the premium that they just received, and they'll have a profit in that case. But if it turns out that the option is eventually exercised and they lose more money on the exercise than they received from the upfront premium, then the expectation didn't work out and there is an overall loss in the transaction. And so to see how the premium is related to risk and reward of this investment, we'll examine again an XYZ January 60 put. In this situation again, we have the strike price of 60 and a premium in this case of 8. So again, what is the writer saying by accepting an 8-point premium? They're considering that the stock will fall by 8 points at most. So if the stock falls by less than 8 points, then they're going to be ahead of the game. So the 8-point premium is going to be related to the eventual thought on how far down the stock will go. If the stock falls below 60, they could be forced to buy stock at the strike price of 60. And what they're hoping is that they'll lose less than 8 points on that eventual transaction. So in theory, the premium compensates the writer for up to 8 points of risk, which is the risk that the stock will, in the case of a put, fall by up to 8 points. As long as the stock does not fall by more than 8 points below 60, the writer should be okay. Now, let's take an example and see if that works out. For example, suppose the stock falls to 56. Well, there would be an exercise in that case because remember, that option is in the money. So the owner of the put is going to exercise it. We're going to be forced to buy stock at 60 that's really worth only 56. So at least on paper, we've got this 4-point loss in this situation. But remember, we received an 8-point premium up front. So overall, we're still all right. We still have an overall profit when we look at both transactions. However, what if the stock falls by more than 8 points below 60? The writer is going to have a problem. Well, for example, let's suppose that the stock value falls all the way to 48. In this case, you're going to have to buy stock at 60. Now, if you're the writer of this put, when actually the stock is only worth 48. So at least on paper here, you have a 12-point loss. Notice that exceeds the 8-point premium you received up front. So overall, you're going to have a loss. You're going to be behind the game in this situation. So the critical level in this particular situation is the level that we're looking at right here. It would seem that if the market value of the stock falls below this level, which turns out to be 52, notice it's 8 points below 60, the writer will lose. And the opposite side of the trade is that the buyer will profit. On the other hand, if the value of that stock stays above 52, then the writer will profit and the buyer will lose in that situation. So that level, $52 per share, is a critical one. That is the break-even point for this particular put option. So how do we find that point for a put option? A break-even point for a put option is the strike price minus the premium in the transaction. So that fits into the rule, put down. If we think about going down below the strike price by the rate of the premium to find that break-even point. Now that we've explored some of the basic features of put options, we're ready to summarize these concepts in our option diagram. So remember, our option diagram from a previous discussion. Now, we're going to fill in the entries for the put options that we've been working with. So if I buy a put option and I have the right to sell the stock at a specific price, recall that I actually want to see the stock drop in order to make a profit. The put writer, whose case we just examined, would actually not like to see that. They would have the opposite desire. The put writer would short the put, would like to see the stock go up. Now the critical level, though, that divides gains from losses is this one. It is the break-even point that we just found. So the person who is the owner of the put, long a put, wants the stock to go below this break-even point. On the other hand, the person who sells that put, short a put, wants the stock to stay above that very same break-even point. And what about risk and reward? How much can you make or lose going through these various types of transactions? Well, again, let's go back to the person who buys the put option first. This person pays the premium to get the privilege of selling the stock at a fixed price. They can either choose to use that privilege or not. It's up to them. If they choose not to use the privilege because it's really not worth it for them to do that, How much do they lose? Well, just the premium that they paid on the option in the first place. On the other hand, they're hoping that the stock will fall below the break-even point. That's the best thing that could happen to this investor. Well, the stock, in fact, not only falls, but also it falls all the way. And what it can do is go down to zero value for the stock. At that point, you'd still be able to take a virtually worthless stock and force somebody else to buy it from you at the strike price. So you would make the strike price. However, remember that you did have to pay the premium up front to buy the option in the first place. So the most that you would be able to make would be that strike price minus the original premium that you paid out. And how about the person who sells the put? Now, before we discuss the individual entries here in any detail, there is one thing that we should point out. Now, remember in our discussion of call options, notice that in that discussion, the risk for someone who buys the call is the reward for the person who sells the call. The reward for the person who buys the call is the risk for the person who sells the call. The person who sells a put will have as a maximum gain what the person who buys the put is risking, which again is the premium. And that makes sense. If you sell a put, you get the premium up front. The best that could happen is that you keep the premium. On the other hand, the worst that could happen is that you could be forced to buy essentially worthless stock for the strike price. So at least on paper, that would be a loss, but you do get to keep the premium that you received up front. So the worst that could happen to you in that situation would be that you'd lose the strike price minus the premium. So by including in our diagram all of these basic ideas and committing that to memory, jotting it down whenever you're trying to work out through some option problems, it can help you check your thinking on the option problems that you're dealing with. Now let's look at the concepts again that we're looking at here. Whenever we see somebody who has purchased a put option, this is what we should think. This person has a right to sell the underlying stock at the strike price. So again, put buyer and right to sell are associations that you should be able to make immediately. Pays the premium. If you bought the option, then you have to pay for it. Well, that turns out to be your maximum loss. On the other hand, you're hoping that the stock will fall, and the best that could happen is that the stock just goes down to zero. At that point, you will earn the strike price minus the premium as your maximum gain. On the other hand, whenever we encounter a put writer, the following ideas should come to mind. Remember, the put writer is the person who has the obligation to buy the underlying stock at the strike price. So again, the immediate association here should be, when you see put writer, think obligation to buy. This is the person who receives the premium. That is your compensation for the risk that you're taking, and that premium is the maximum gain that you can earn. You're attempting, in fact, to generate income by earning that premium or writing the option. Now you hope the stock does not fall, but if it does, that's when you have a problem. The stock could fall all the way to zero. You could be forced to buy worthless